Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
It is Tuesday, and in the United States, it is a big election day. So I've got to start out by just saying, vote. Whatever you believe in, vote for it. Vote for it, get out, go. And the reason is because each of us take actions and we have ripple effects that happen from those actions. And in fact, you're in the right place for understanding more ripple effects over time, specifically within your organization. We're talking about things that affect us related to our current needs, problems we're solving, technology we're thinking about implementing, customer expectations, changing markets, the status and the health of our own businesses, and the roles that we hold in our businesses. It's about what it means to reach our short-term goals, to achieve our longer-term positioning. And you are watching Program 182, Direct Impact on Core Business. We're changing our state. We're changing our surroundings. We are going one step further and changing the way that we show up with other people in conversation and in intention. As leaders in our businesses, we have stewardship, and it requires responsibility. And to discuss and evaluate and understand more of that responsibility, today we're talking with Nadine B. She's the CEO of Because Global Consulting, and she advises Fortune 500 companies, executives, heads of state, and other leaders and organizations internationally. Global CEO has named her one of the top 100 corporate social responsibility leaders in the world. And today she's joining us from Switzerland. Nadine, welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Jess.
I am glad to hear it. And I know, are we making international news with our voting today? I just have to ask the question.
Absolutely. The entire world is watching this breathlessly.
And seeing what's happening. I know, I have to tell you, my ballot was in. They actually send me emails and tell me where it is in the process. So I know in Boulder, Colorado, we do absentee ballots. So yes. Send it in and they send you an email and they get it and you get an email and they've counted it or rejected it and you get an email. Thankfully,
I did the same thing as an overseas voter.
Yeah, okay, so that's similar for you then, which is great. Now, as far as we're thinking about each other, and I'm going to just start in this place of it doesn't matter where we're at when we're talking politics, religion, or business. There are typically two sides to every story. And even in business, we've got people that we work with that may be dug in. They may only see what they want to see. They may know what they want to know. And by the way, sometimes we may be one of those people. Got to hold that mirror up every chance I get. Sometimes we might be that person too. So when we're dealing with that and looking for ways to converse in an effective manner to move conversations and decisions forward, what are a few things that we might keep in mind to facilitate that, especially when we're talking with people of a different opinion?
Yeah. So Jess, I think you know that I've done a lot of work in the space of what I call engagement leadership, connectedness, building stronger bridges among different types of stakeholders. And I really love the Welsh proverb, she who would be a leader, of course it was he, but I'm paraphrasing, she who would be a leader must be a bridge. And what I call engagement leaders are, in fact, bridges. They are people who have the ability to connect extremely divergent types of people for the advantage of each and for all. And why? People value being asked their opinion. People, if they feel validated by being heard, they're so much more likely to embrace the outcome, even if it isn't the opinion they proffered. And research shows this. It's simply on the fundamental level, everybody likes to be seen, heard, legitimized. And I call this connectedness. And most of my work is about helping people to connect, to tap into that. In my company, Because Global Consulting, we help individuals and organizations connect to their own core purpose. We help them connect between silos. Often people are sitting side by side in cubicles and they don't know what the other person is doing, or at the least and at the worst, they're trying to sabotage what the person in the next cubicle is doing. The same thing where, and they're losing all the synergy of if they could collaborate and work together. I also do this with external friendly stakeholders, your partners, your vendors, your suppliers, your clients. But I even help organizations and entities do this with adversarial antagonists, as I describe in my TED talk.
Yes.
And my sister not-for-profit has since 1974 also been convening extremely diverse, concerned individuals, Global Citizen Circle, from world leaders to local activists, people from every sector, business, government, civil society, to have challenging discussions to stimulate meaningful and enduring resolution of our world's problems. And the success I've had with these enterprises and many others teach me that the more diversity you include in deliberating complex issues, the more likely you are to come up with sustainable solutions. And engagement leaders know how to create what I call safe spaces, intimacy, mutual trust, to encourage civil discourse, even if you have really differing perspectives, built on very fundamental core principles of inclusiveness, mutual respect, and trust.
And even in and I'm sticking with adversarial.
Sure.
Obviously, because of today, right? And
Sure.
what we're looking at, and what we in the United States have faced a lot.
Yes.
And I'm going to even make it more personal. Let's get out of the politics realm and let's actually think about that person who might be in the cubicle next to us, who might be in the office down the hall,
Right.
who is sabotaging, and you feel it. It's
Yes.
just not overt. So how do you open a dialogue and create maybe a lack of engagement? So that bridge that you were talking about,
Yeah.
create an engagement opportunity to learn about them, to figure out what their motives are.
So I think there are several key components. And a long time ago, I started telling clients I no longer do strategic planning. And they would look at me with a really confused expression. And I would respond, no, I now only do strategic action planning. And what I meant by that is the most notorious failure of virtually all strategic plans is that they don't take into account who is actually going to do what, by when, within what budget, and, in other words, execute the plan.
Right.
And even before you get to the point of execution, you have to engage people in a process of buy-in to the plan. So if people don't have a sense of ownership, and this undermines their sense of responsibility. And worse, if they don't feel a sense of agency in the decision-making process, they can actually become totally disengaged from any obligation to carry out a plan, because no one likes to be dictated to. Everybody prefers to be conferred with.
Yes. Can I, and that makes me think, have you heard of the phrase gig economy?
Yes, but
okay.
Tell me the context you're using it in now.
Sure. And so what makes me think, I think the gig economy appeared because of people deciding I'm being told what to do too much. So I've got a skill or a set of skills, and I know I can trade my skill for money, and I'm going to go out on my own and I'm going to do that.
Yes.
And now we're seeing organizations, international, global organizations, recognizing, and I think and I can't wait to hear what you think, because being the expert here, it's interesting to watch, because you've got these people who are like, I'm going to do it my way and I'm going to set my own hours. And organizations are like, well, how do we compete with this? And how do we actually make sure that we still have the engagement that we want, that
Yeah.
we're not dictating to, yet we all are on the same bowling alley with our bumper lanes closed up. So we're going to hit the pins together.
Well, as I'm sure you know, there's an enormous amount of research and thought leadership going into the future of work, exactly pertaining to the points you raise. Things are changing at a dizzyingly speed because of technology and the speed with which we get information. What the acronym VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, confusing, I think it's a different word, and ambiguous, complex and ambiguous.
There you go. Okay.
But I think also the point you're referencing has very much to do with millennials. And I was telling you before we went on air that I've got grandchildren who are in their 20s. And I remember watching one of my granddaughters when she was pre-verbal. She was sitting in her high chair and she was playing a game on the computer. And this was before internet. It was more, you put a tape in. So she was playing with one of these games. And the game was, there were a bunch of fish and a bunch of birds on the screen. And there was a bird cage and there was a fish bowl. And the game was put the birds in the cage, put the fish in the bowl. And I was watching her do this and I was in awe, because I said, oh my God, Skylar is learning drag and drop pre-verbally. She will have no conscious memory of her first interface with the computer. She will have always been interfacing. And like you and I have no conscious memory of when we first crawled.
Right.
And I say that because the millennial generation is so used to engaging. They're so used that they don't want commercials telling them. They want to engage with and so they are becoming the customer base. They are becoming the workforce. And whether businesses like it or not, they are going to have to adapt to deal with that.
And okay, so in the research that I've done and continue to do, I see similar things. I find it fascinating that you're putting that with the millennials, because I also see that with baby boomers of, I've had enough, I put in my time, and now it's time to have some fun. By the way, I'm a Gen X, so I see both sides.
No, I think you're right. I'm a boomer. Yeah. So, and it's definitely clear that, and I advise a lot of very senior executives in corporations, and it's often on responsible leadership issues, but since professional and in my mind, professional and personal issues are inextricably interconnected, and when you're not happy in your professional life, it's going to affect your personal life, and conversely, we often go into very personal exploration of what's happening in their lives. Mm-hmm. And they definitely are getting fed up. The ones who haven't reached the pinnacle, and they're at a very senior level of management, but they kind of see that they're being blocked by their board, by their whatever. They're not really being utilized. They're not being listened to. Exactly what I talked about. They're not being engaged. They're not only are leaders making plans without engaging them, leave alone people at a lower level who really have their finger on the pulse beat of what's happening in the business. They're just announcing, and these people are fed up. I can't do this anymore. And it's not that they're not getting a pay raise. They're right, often being very handsomely compensated, mm-hmm. but they just don't feel. And may I just say, please, this is exactly the same thing that women have faced for a very long time. there is a mythology about the mommy track, that the reason women leave businesses is because they have their children and they decide they can't balance the two. No, when you interview women 10 years after they had their children and ask the question, why did you leave? They say, it was because I was not being listened to. And how many times have you heard the story? I was sitting in a board meeting, and I offered up a suggestion. It fell on deaf ears. 5 minutes later, a man said the same thing, and everyone said, that's brilliant. And I thought, were they deaf? Did they not, you know? And that is
I've been there. That's one of my stories.
That's so debilitating and demoralizing. It's why more and more small and medium-sized enterprises are women-led, and why boomers. So you're right. It's happening at all ends of the spectrum. The future of work is really changing dramatically as we speak.
And in addition to that, one of the catalysts to get it center focus right now today is technology. We have our ability to be satisfied and gratified by technology. Yet the work that goes into getting that satisfaction and gratification so quickly, it takes a long time. And many of us, we recognize there's a paradox. We are not willing to engage in the paradox because we want it on both sides.
You know, you're raising another point that I recognize all the time about leaders tending to really significantly underestimate the amount of time it actually takes to get shared commitment to a goal. The number of times I've heard something like, so we're going to have this big communication, we're going to explain the plan to our senior managers, and in 3 months they'll cascade it down through the whole organization. And they often pronounce this, as I said earlier, without ever having engaged even their senior managers, leave alone anybody else, in any part of the process, dialogue, debate, discussion, closure that led to the plan, and yet they expect them to embrace it, and embrace it fast. And, you know, if you think about, remember that book 20 years ago, Who Moved My Cheese?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, bestseller for 5 years, 26 million copies, 37 languages, still one of the top-selling business books. This ridiculously simple concept became a motivational business fable. Why? Because people get the idea. The book's subtitle was something like An Amazing Way to Deal with Change in your work and in your life. And they understood it through the reluctance of the two characters who are called Hem and Haw. And we cognitively grasp that change is hard, that it takes time, but we don't often give the space, the time, the structure, the support for people to actually embrace it, to own it. In fact, it's exactly because the people who moved the cheese didn't share their rationale, nor did they engage their stakeholders in formulating it, that's causing all the hemming and hawing.
You know what's funny is it makes me think of the process of problem solving and decision making.
Yeah.
The majority of the work of problem solving and decision making, when it's done really well, is before any action and discussion and dialogue ever occurs.
Right.
You know, and so it's like, well, if we're going to invest all of this time, because I think that's where we feel like innovation is at. And it's that, you know, well, we've got to get as many ideas out there and evaluate as much ideas as possible so everybody's voice is heard. And I'm curious to hear what you think about this, because it's just coming to me right now, which is just like in those scenarios, why not come up with the few ideas and allow people to step up into and put their belief into something that you already know is going to work. And so it doesn't really matter which way you go, there's going to be the forward movement.
I think it's a little bit of both and, Jess.
Okay, tell me more.
A lot of, one of my colleagues at IMD, Bill Fisher, the idea hunter, he famously says, you know, more ideas are better than fewer ideas. Because the concept of disruptive innovation, which is, every business is trying to get that golden goose,
Mm-hmm.
is that, you do fast prototyping, you throw out a lot of stuff, you see what works, and I think there's some validity to that. I think that a kind of brainstorm, but then there has to be like the company IDEO out in California.
Yes.
They do that, you know, frenzied brainstorming, and then they call the adults in to focus in. Okay, now we have to make choices. Now we have to vote. Now we have to hone down into which of these we choose and really focus on them and really develop them. But the issue is, who are you involving at each stage of that process?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's only a very narrow band of your organization, then no matter what kind of plan you come up with, and no matter what kind of process that narrow band of people use, it's very unlikely, especially the larger the enterprise, that it's going to have a real impact. I mean, so many times I have watched people when we have a new way of doing, and I've watched people just sit there and go, yep, this is like the sixth new thing that's come down the pike since I've been employed here. I'm just going to sit and wait until this one peters out.
Isn't that interesting?
It's
So
really,
in terms, okay, so you actually took my next question of when you were talking about the amount of people being that narrow band.
yeah,
And in organizations where that band stays narrow,
yeah,
that's where there's missing value, is what I hear you say.
exactly.
Okay. And so,
And talking back to your technology point, Jess,
yeah.
there are now lots of platforms like Power Noodle and endless others where they allow large numbers of people from across the all the different levels of the organization to give input anonymously on a shared platform. Nobody knows who it's coming from, so you can say anything. And then again, there's a voting process so that all these ideas come out, and you don't know whether the idea came from the CEO, the intern, or anybody in between.
Mm-hmm.
And they hone in. So technology can facilitate more people. I mean, think about us right now. Being your technician is in one time zone, you're in another time zone, and I'm in a third time zone, and we're having a conversation in real life, in real time.
Yep.
And you can have 50 people be part of a conversation, not necessarily a verbal conversation, but using technology tools, a conversation in which their input is being incorporated, truly being incorporated, not just a tick the box.
And there's a difference. And I have a
So,
story about the time that it didn't work.
yeah, okay.
And
Which
then,
is most of the time.
well, and I say that because it didn't work because it was, we've got to get a fast track to just what you were talking about, the fast track to the right ideas to solve
Yep.
problems and get new things out as quickly as possible. The thing is, it allowed people to bypass their bosses. And if their bosses didn't buy in, even when the ideas were acceptable and made the company money, there was still backlash because the boss felt like they had been left behind. And in my opinion, rightly so, because they apparently weren't listening anyway, which is why a process like this was necessary. And so this goes back to value. So even though the band was expanded, the
Yeah,
people who were involved in actually creating value there
yeah.
didn't see the value and caused a big ruckus in between. And
Yeah.
so,
This is a very classic fissure between what I call the C-suite, the board, and the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, the CTO, those people in the rarefied, and then everybody else.
mm-hmm.
And it can go in either direction. It can be that they decide, but they don't, really think about how engaging others. It can be that brilliant ideas are coming up and everybody's in agreement. But if there's like one board member who's got a lot of power, who is in a different mindset, it's usually a he, there's more and more she's on board, but still too few, he can stop it dead in its track. And so this has to be multi-directional, this engagement. Like it can't just be top down, it can't just be bottom up. It really has to be, you know, a true 360 loop, a feedback loop. Connectedness and engagement is iterative. It doesn't just happen one time like that. We're going to have the communication, and then it's over and over and over, and it involves practice like everything else. So people have practiced a great deal of whatever specific technical expertise they have in their respective spheres, but they haven't practiced as much of what we're talking about, which are typically called soft skills, which I find extremely ironic because I find them to be the backbone of what makes things actually happen or not. They haven't practiced, and they need to practice, and it's iterative, and it's a growing process, but it's so fundamental. I mean, long before Aristotle opined that human beings were social animals, people were grouping together from the earliest days of humanity. And long since then, there's been an enormous amount of research and scientific discovery that underpins this idea to the level of that we share mirror neurons that allow us to match each other's emotions unconsciously and immediately. I mean, it's remarkable how, I've had the pleasure to work with leaders who in their various sectors, enterprises, geographies, racial, national, ethnic, gender, whatever context, are really achieving great results by helping diverse people cooperate, be social, engage with each other. And where we started out about the election, in a world that's becoming increasingly polarized and fear-driven, and it's not just the United States, sadly, we see this throughout the world, it's vital to show that while we're each, of course, unique and different, we're fundamentally so much more alike. And even the difference, the diversity, contributing it makes the whole so much greater than the sum of the parts, and it strengthens us. But it takes a real shift in consciousness to not just believe that, but act on that. It's still very easy to be hierarchical and or territorial.
Use hashtag VBB Radio to join in our conversation. We'll be right back after this.
You're listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. Stay current and receive programs to continue sparking ideas about growth strategy by subscribing to the program at voiceofboldbusiness.com. Now, back to Jess.
Nadine Hack is here with us. She is the CEO of Because Global Consulting, and she's been named one of the top 100 thought leaders on trustworthy business behavior. We are talking about everything that I love. I mean, this is like, this is like eating just the icing off of the cake and not worrying about the fact that the cake will be wasted. I mean, this is just so perfect. And I want to jump back in with a question from Kate from our audience.
Sure.
Kate says, I like the idea of that we involve more people in every stage of the process.
Yeah.
I still have a question. In this place of disruptive innovation, we still need to slow down, don't we? So we get the right result instead of not necessarily where we wanted to be.
Yeah. And Kate, you ask an excellent question. I kind of hinted at this earlier, that this is a double-edged sword. There's two trains of thought. They both have validity. I just was watching the founder of LinkedIn on a news interview, and he said he was discussing, he was asked, you know, how he chose, what was going to determine who would be successful in this highly competitive, disruptive economy. And he said, the ones who scale the quickest. It doesn't matter if they make a million mistakes. It doesn't, like, get it out fast, get it out. So there's obviously a group of people who, you know, financially it's proving to be successful. They're working the kinks out. We're the guinea pigs. We get version 101. We give all the feedback, what's wrong, and then we get 101.2, and, you know, it goes on and on. And then there are the other people who are saying, okay, slow down, breathe. There's this whole movement toward mindfulness. And in fact, corporations are hiring mindfulness experts, whether they're yoga teachers or meditation teachers, or they come from some other discipline, to help their employees become more grounded, more present, to breathe, and to get off of that kind of hamster wheel, get more and more done, and say, let me do one thing, let me get it done right, and then I'll move on to the next thing. And I'm actually constantly telling myself that. In fact, right on my computer is a little sticker with 3 phrases. The first one says, slow down. The second one says, do one thing at a time. And the third one says, take breaks. Why? My brain is like a popcorn machine. I'm getting like a million ideas an hour, and I'm trying to like work on all of them. And then I look down, I see this note, and Nadine, breathe, sit, get your spine aligned, take 3 deep breaths, really think more consciously and in a present way. What am I doing right now, and am I doing it correctly? So yes, you're right, Kate.
I tell you what, there's an element of, and this is going to bring back the soft skills piece into our conversation, where sometimes starting slow and willing to recognize mistakes and blind spots quickly is the best, fastest way to getting to the right solution. So when we hear fail fast, fail often, it's almost like it's external to us, and we're going to just keep going and going and going. Well, I say, let's pause it, putting it back on us, just like crawling to walking. There are muscles that must be developed by crawling to allow us to have the wherewithal to stand up eventually. And our bodies do this naturally through movement. And we forget in this world where, yes, there's a lot of opportunity, and yes, we are moving faster than fast. And at the same point in time, when we're failing trying to walk before we've even crawled, by the way, there are a lot of people who do that, right?
Yes.
There are fundamental other skills, though, in the interim between the two that must be learned. And we're not very good at, as humans, of recognizing going backwards to learn. We always want to start where we're at and go forward. Start where we're at and go forward. And that's a little bit of an issue when we're talking about soft skills. I would say even personal awareness.
I'm glad you just said that, because I was going to build on what you were saying by bringing in personal awareness. So perfect segue. I've really discovered, after decades of working with leaders from all sectors, that the difference between what I call highly competent managers and truly great leaders is the level of self-awareness, the willingness to look inside and acknowledge and own the good, the bad, the ugly. You know, what some people call embracing the shadow self. And really doing that, makes us so much more holistically intelligent, not just IQ, EQ, emotional intelligence, LQ, learning intelligence. I mean, it just allows us to ground. And I can honestly say, having done both things, creating a large body of work in the world that I'm very proud of, while simultaneously exploring a huge body of what's inside of me, that the latter was the harder work. But I believe that because I did that work and I continue to do that work, that it improves my external abilities. And it definitely increases my empathy toward others. Because when I recognize how flawed I am, and it just gives me so much more compassion toward whatever shortcoming I perceive in another person, and want to understand, well, what's driving that?
Isn't that interesting? Compassion. It's an amazing word. And
Yeah.
sometimes I use the word love in business, Nadine.
Yes.
Because if we don't love ourselves, there's
Yes.
no way we can have any sort of connection or compassion toward another person, let alone potentially love them for what they bring, the positives and the negatives, which, by the
Yep.
way, my positives and negatives are great positives and great negatives in certain situations, and in other situations they're reversed. The great
Exactly.
negatives become those positives.
Exactly. Every strength has its Achilles heel, and
Mhm.
vice versa. Every vulnerability has its power.
Yeah.
And there is a reason, when you say you have to love yourself, know yourself in order to love and know others, there's a reason why on airplanes they say put on your own oxygen mask first. You cannot help anybody else if you're not alive. You cannot help anybody else if you're not healthy. And intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, psychically. And there's so much showing that the stress that's created in the modern work environment works against all of those levels of health of individuals. And unhealthy individuals create unhealthy organizations, create unhealthy societies. I mean, it's not rocket science.
That's right. And we're trying to talk about the positive ripples. And I'm so glad you bring up that the negative also ripples. And
Yes.
really that negative, especially with fear, and we're wired, right, in our lizard brain to remember fear things first, that
Right.
it's easier to remember that, and it's harder to reduce those ripples. And thinking back to the awareness, the intelligences, are
Hmm.
there three things? Okay, so I'm going to think about three things. And this is going to be for leaders that are listening that are like, I get I'm supposed to be more self aware. I don't feel like I'm making the progress I want. And for the leaders who are saying, I've got this awareness, and how do I keep practicing to increase that awareness?
Where to begin?
Right? I know. I'm so sorry I asked you to distill it to three things.
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of them.
Yes.
So, and what I'd say is there's also a finite, I'm thinking this today in the context of elections. I'm thinking this today in the context of a world that we see people manipulating fear-driven kind of protectionism. And I'm reflecting, I recently spoke in Zurich on the 50th anniversary of Robert F. Kennedy's assassination. And the program began with a 30-minute documentary, a documentary on his life that was created in 1968 and immediately and won the Academy Award for documentary film. And then there were three panelists. One was a White House correspondent. One was the political editor of the leading German newspaper in Switzerland, and me. And one of the points that came out, because you say the ripples, Bobby Kennedy gave that famous ripple of hope speech. And what came through the film was that he he was approaching a positive, inclusive populism. And the other two panelists were beginning to go into the, oh me, oh my, we have all of this. Now it's not a positive, inclusive populism, it's a divisive, excluding populism. And I kept bringing the conversation back to, wait a minute, we can sit here and moan and groan, but that's putting more energy into that negative spiral. What I would prefer to do is ask each human being who's in this room, there are several hundred people, to think right now, what can you personally do right now that will have a more positive impact on your immediate environment, in your community, in your workplace, in your neighborhood, in your nation, in your world, and do that thing. You know, there's a parable that I heard a long time ago, and I've said it so many times. There's a little boy. It's tide is out, and there's hundreds of thousands of starfish drying under the beating sun, and a man is watching him throw one in, and then the next one in, and the man comes up to him and says, "Kid, what you're doing is futile." And the kid takes the next one, throws it in, and with a smile says, "Not for that one, it isn't." And yeah, you
That's a beautiful
just
story.
never know. Touch one person, touch one point of positive change. You don't know. When I was younger, I viewed it as a sprint. I came of age in the 1960s, and I really believed, given the context of the world at the time, we were going to change everything right away, right then, now. And then I got a little bit older, and I began to look at it more as a marathon. I have to pace myself. I have to stay at this for the long run. Then I became a little bit older, and now I see it as a relay race. And I may never see, I likely will not see the complete fruition of all the social good that I care about passionately and that I've worked for. But I have a sacred obligation to carry the torch while I'm here. And I think it really comes down to each person thinking that way. It's up to me. Be the change you want to see.
Yes. Okay, we're going to switch gears just a little because we have another audience question. Hashtag VBB Radio. This question is from Marty. He says, which by the way, I think this first part, he's like joining us right there in the same choir. Fail often and fail fast is only focusing on the failure instead of glorifying the knowledge that we are gaining to use later. How can we embrace and put back that focus into the knowledge instead of failure?
Yes.
Because we tend to compete in failing.
Well, Marty, I think it actually is the knowledge that even those people who are saying fail often to learn faster are really implicitly, and maybe they need to more explicitly state it, are saying you learn from your failures. And in fact, probably a lot of us have learned more from our failures than even our successes. You learn lessons. Now, that's assuming that you do learn. And that's really the critical point, Marty. Like, people who are willing to take an experience of not succeeding at something and analyze it and be honest and figure out, what could I have done differently? What happened? What do I now know that I can apply for the future? Will continue to grow and learn and be richer and fuller and bring more of themselves to the table. There are other people who just keep, like, as you say, they just get caught up in the failing. Like, I have to go as fast as I can, and they're not bothering to take the time to learn the lessons, to integrate the lessons, because, you know, we tend to learn lessons first on a cognitive level, and then it has to go kind of work its way down, integrate in until we really have it at a visceral level. Like, okay, now I know this is a weakness I have. This is a weakness I have to address when I go into the next situation that's like that. Or this is a weakness in our system of working together that we have to address. And like I said to an earlier point, that process is iterative. There's a psychological term called working through, where you learn something and then you kind of forget it, and then you learn it again, and you learn it at a deeper level, and it's like concentric circles going out and concentric circles going in, and you learn it again and you forget it and you learn it again, and eventually you actually integrate it in so that it's knowledge that you hold on to. But you really do have to have the patience to go through that learning process. And there is so much in our world that's saying like fast. Now, the other thing that strikes me is the number of teenagers I meet. Well, let me say, there's also, I'm utterly, deeply, profoundly inspired by all the teenage activists around the world who are doing extraordinary, remarkable social justice work. They give me hope for the future. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about a different subset of teenagers now, the ones who say to me, yeah, I want to make $1 million before I can drop out of high school and make $1 trillion. You know, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, they, you know, my garage, and, you know, and there's this kind of get rich fast philosophy that's permeating the popular culture, mm-hmm. and is, I think, not a good thing.
What makes it
bold? I hope that addressed your question, Marty.
I think it did. And I really do think it did, Nadine. What makes it bold to evaluate capacity for impact?
Well, you know, it's easy to say you're committed to something. And for quite some time now, most businesses have begun to articulate their social purpose, some version of the so-called triple P, people, planet, profit. And they have these beautiful mission, vision statements, and everybody can repeat them like mantras. But, you know, and it's about their commitment to their employees and the planet, and along with their shareholders. But I believe that until they actually begin to measure these in performance reviews and explicitly tie them to bonuses and other forms of reward, we won't see the degree of changed behavior we need in the business sector, which has such an outsized impact in our world right now. In some places, like multinationals have more power than nation states. And so they really do have an obligation. But I've met so many executives, mid-managers, in these businesses, good, wonderful, well-intentioned people who believe in the values of contributing to a healthier, more peaceful, more just planet, but who only get rewarded by their companies via based on quarterly financial results. So no matter how noble you are, if you're trying to send your kids to college and you're getting rewarded for this, it's a no-brainer which you're going to work harder to achieve. So I believe we need a radical kind of rethinking of which capacities we reward. I recently participated in a gathering of 45 of the world's thought leaders on impact investing and philanthropy, and even they were honest in admitting that they had a long way to go in their foundations, family, public, corporate, non-governmental organizations. They were affiliated, lots of different, but they were saying, we have a long way to go before we're really truly walking the talk. But I was encouraged by their self-reflection and their self-critique. And last year I was shortlisted by Ethical Corporation to be the responsible CEO of the year. And it was with the CEOs of Patagonia, Danone, Accenture, Yes Bank, Globe Telecom, Firmenich. And I had an opportunity to interact with leaders from each of these companies. And I'd already known about some of their social commitments. I've been following Patagonia for quite a long time. Um, but I learned that they too are engaged in their own tough conversations about how to transform their business to truly become responsible businesses. And it just takes a lot of courage to walk the talk. And as I said earlier, I'm hoping the millennial generation will have an impact on that. I will keep contributing everything I can to that. Um,
I will keep contributing my part to that as well. That is a commitment I have, that I share with you, that I share with everybody out there that wants to see change and recognizes that it's only the actions in front of us, that the choices in front of us that we can make a difference in, be a model to those around us. And I'm going to use the word propagate because it popped into my head.
Yeah.
Possibility instead of the opposite of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that wraps up our show, Nadine. And everybody who is watching, tuning in, listening a little bit later, you can find all of the program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P182. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 182. You may also search the website for Nadine Hack and the title of the show, Direct Impact on Core Business. It's your turn. Keep this conversation going. Tell Nadine, tell me, what are you seeing in your organizations? What is your thought around the conversation we had today? What else do we include? Because it's what we're doing together and applying my experience, Nadine's experience, your experience, and everybody out there and around us. That's what increases our awareness and allows us to learn. So we don't have to experience everything firsthand. We can pull from a body of knowledge and self-awareness that we have and self-awareness that others have. Rate this program on iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, wherever you're listening and watching, and wherever you are subscribing. Consider, what is your direct impact on core business?
The Voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. Use hashtag VBBRadio or email us at radio@reddirection.com to ask questions and share your experiences. Add your voice to the conversation. Together, we define what being an effective leader means today. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.